As the chill of late November 1944 settled over the vast European theater, General der Panzertruppe Otto von Manteuffel, deeply engrossed in the clandestine preparations for the Ardennes offensive, received intelligence reports that struck him as utterly preposterous. His G2 intelligence summary for November 20, later uncovered within captured records, declared, agents report massive shipment of frozen turkeys to American forces. This appears to be deception operation to hide offensive preparations. Yet, it was no deception. On November 23, 1944, American troops, some huddled in foxholes just opposite the formidable Siegfried Line, sat down to a full Thanksgiving dinner, turkey with all the trimmings, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. Units facing sporadic German artillery fire were served these hot meals, a stark contrast to the meager rations of their adversaries. This seemingly impossible feat of culinary logistics would shatter every preconceived German notion of warfare, and the true scale of American industrial might, which allowed such luxuries to reach the front, would forever reshape military doctrine. We will later explore how this unprecedented logistical prowess wasn't merely a wartime advantage but the very foundation of America's post-war global influence. On July 20, 1944, at the German 7th Army headquarters in Le Mans, France, SS-Obergruppenführer Paul Hauser, the recent replacement for Generaloberst Friedrich Dahlmann, meticulously examined incoming intelligence reports, his skepticism mounting with each line. 6 weeks after the D-Day landings, American forces were receiving provisions at a pace that utterly defied the established logistical principles of the Wehrmacht. The hastily scrawled annotations in the margins of his intelligence brief, later recovered from captured German archives, included a particularly striking observation: the Americans are operating field bakeries 15 kilometers from the front lines. This is either propaganda or a revolution in military supply we do not comprehend. Through a combination of intercepted radio transmissions and detailed accounts from forward observers, German intelligence had meticulously documented activities that flew in the face of 4 years of Wehrmacht experience. American soldiers, still embroiled in the brutal hedgerow fighting across Normandy, were not merely receiving essential ammunition and fuel. They were also being supplied with hot meals, freshly baked bread, letters from home, and, according to one report that stretched credulity, even doughnuts, served by women in Red Cross uniforms. The inaugural Red Cross Club Mobile had, in fact, arrived on July 16, a mere 4 days prior. These converted trucks, staffed by American women volunteers, had somehow been deemed sufficiently critical to justify precious transatlantic shipping space. For the Wehrmacht, an organization that had systematically stripped its soldiers of even basic comforts in the relentless pursuit of operational efficiency, this allocation of resources to troop morale seemed nothing short of military lunacy. What German soldiers and their commanders had yet to fully grasp was that they were witnessing not American extravagance, but the relentless application of American industrial logic to the theater of war. The capacity to deliver comfort items directly to combat troops was not a separate luxury, it was the ultimate demonstration of military power. An army capable of providing fresh doughnuts under enemy fire could, without question, ensure an inexhaustible supply of ammunition. German confidence in the inherent weakness of American logistics was deeply ingrained. Since 1940, Wehrmacht intelligence had diligently scrutinized American military doctrine, and their assessments had been consistently dismissive. The Foreign Army's West Intelligence Section, led by Oberstleutnant Alexis von Rohan, routinely reported American reliance on material comfort as a critical vulnerability. The empirical data appeared to substantiate German assumptions. American military planning documents, recovered from a downed glider in Sicily, indicated that U.S. forces required approximately 45 pounds of supplies per soldier daily. This contrasted sharply with Wehrmacht allocations, which ranged from 9.3 pounds for inactive troops to 20 pounds during normal operations. German commanders, who had endured far more austere conditions in Russia, interpreted this as irrefutable proof of American softness. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, the commander-in-chief west for the German army, articulated typical Wehrmacht thinking in a May 1944 staff conference, as recounted in the post-war testimony of his chief of staff, General Gunther Blumentritt. the Americans require 3 times our supply tonnage. They believe war is a matter of material. We have proven in Russia that will triumphs over material. When their elaborate supply system encounters the friction of war, it will collapse. This was not mere propaganda, it reflected a deeply held German military philosophy. The Wehrmacht doctrine of Auftragstaktik emphasized initiative, improvisation, and austerity. German soldiers were rigorously trained to live off the land, to operate autonomously when isolated, and to continue fighting without a steady supply line. The American insistence on maintaining robust supply chains for items Germans considered luxuries, chocolate, cigarettes, writing paper, appeared to validate Nazi propaganda about democratic decadence. Wehrmacht logistics officers had calculated the impossibility of American plans. According to captured German documents, Major Heinrich von Stulpnagel of Army Group B's supply staff had presented analyses demonstrating that, to supply 12 divisions across open beaches would require 8,400 tons daily. No military force in history has achieved even half this tonnage without established ports. They claim they will accomplish this while under fire. It is mathematically impossible. What German intelligence had catastrophically failed to comprehend was the sheer scale of American preparation. For 2 painstaking years, the United States had systematically transformed Britain into what General Eisenhower famously termed, one gigantic military base. By June 1944, American and British forces had amassed an astonishing 2.5 million tons of supplies, enough to completely fill a freight train stretching from London to Edinburgh and back again. The invasion fleet that crossed the Channel on June 6 represented the largest naval operation in history, comprising 6,939 vessels, including 4,126 dedicated landing craft. Yet, beyond these staggering numbers lay logistical innovations that German planners simply could not have conceived. Specialized vessels, specifically landing ship, tanks, LSTs, were ingeniously converted into floating kitchens, complete with fully functional ranges and ovens capable of baking fresh bread while still at sea. According to U.S. Navy records, LST-357 had been modified with refrigeration units maintaining precise 32-degree temperatures during the Channel crossing. LST-491 carried a complete field bakery that would be operational within mere hours of beaching. These were not emergency modifications but meticulously planned allocations of resources that German doctrine would have dismissed as utterly wasteful. German E-boat patrols encountering the invasion convoys reported puzzling observations. Korvettenkapitän Friedrich Hoffmann, commander of E-boat flotilla S-130, noted in his war diary, observed unusual vessels in Allied convoy. Appear to be modified merchant ships, painted military gray, purposefully painted in a black and white color. Unknown, but emanating smoke similar to factory vessels. By June 26, 1944, D+20, American logistics had achieved what German doctrine had deemed impossible. Despite continuous combat and without the benefit of a single major port, the Americans were landing an average of 15,000 tons of supplies daily across the Normandy beaches. For context, the entire German Army Group B in France was receiving a mere 8,000 tons weekly. Quartermaster Corps records indicate that by this date, mobile bakeries were fully operational at Omaha and Utah beaches, each producing an astounding 60,000 pounds of fresh bread daily. This was not the hard biscuit that German troops subsisted on, but fresh white and whole wheat bread, baked in portable ovens and distributed warm to frontline units each morning. German intelligence officers struggled to reconcile what they were observing. Oberst Fritz von Mellenthin, an intelligence officer with the 352nd Infantry Division, reported to his superiors on June 28, in documents captured from his headquarters, American soldiers in forward positions are receiving packaged meals that include canned meat, vegetables, crackers, candy, and cigarettes. Each meal contains more variety than our troops have seen in months. They discard half-eaten rations that our soldiers would consider feast items. The sheer speed of American supply establishment defied all Wehrmacht experience. By June 30, the Americans had landed 71,000 vehicles, 440,000 men, and 148,000 tons of supplies, establishing 97 supply dumps across the beachhead. The German invasion of Norway in 1940, conducted against minimal opposition through captured ports, had required 3 weeks to achieve comparable tonnage levels. German dismissal of American logistical capabilities extended to the artificial harbors, famously known as Mulberries. Wehrmacht intelligence had identified components being constructed in British ports through aerial reconnaissance, but the German naval assessment had been utterly dismissive. Admiral Friedrich Ruge, Rommel's naval advisor, had briefed Army Group B on May 20 about the theoretical possibility of artificial harbors. According to his post-war memoirs, the concept is theoretically possible but practically limited. Atlantic storms and channel tides will restrict any temporary structure to minimal capacity. We estimate maximum throughput of 1,000 tons daily under ideal conditions. By June 18, the American Mulberry A at Omaha Beach was fully operational. It initially handled 3,000 tons daily before rapidly ramping up to 7,000 tons, 7 times the maximum German estimate. The harbor comprised 600,000 tons of concrete and caissons, 180,000 tons of steel, and floating roadways that could accommodate 2,000 vehicles daily. German observers were stunned by the engineering achievement. Oberst Hans von Luck, whose 21st Panzer Division operated near the British Mulberry B, later wrote in his memoirs, "We watched through field glasses as an entire harbor materialized from nothing. Ships unloaded directly onto floating roads that adjusted with the tides. Trucks drove from ship to shore without stopping." In just 1 week, the Allies had created port facilities that surpassed the capacity of many established French harbors. The psychological impact was immediate. The Mulberries represented not just logistical capability but an overwhelming engineering dominance. If the Americans could construct harbors from scratch, what military feat was beyond their reach? The single most psychologically devastating event in military logistics history, as German commanders would later identify, was the arrival of the first Red Cross Club Mobile on French soil. This vehicle, affectionately nicknamed Daniel Boone, landed at Utah Beach and within hours was serving fresh doughnuts and hot coffee to combat troops. German intelligence initially dismissed reports of women serving refreshments near the front lines as pure propaganda. Oberst Friedrich von Mellenthin, an intelligence officer with Panzer Group West, noted in his July 20 assessment, reports of American women operating mobile canteens in combat zones are either wholly false or indicate American command incompetence that endangers civilians. The reports were accurate. Within a week of the first arrival, 12 clubmobiles were operating across Normandy. These GMC trucks, specially modified with donut-making equipment, coffee urns, and serving windows, could produce 2,000 donuts and 500 gallons of coffee daily. The 3-woman crews worked within range of German artillery, following combat units as they advanced. American soldier letters, captured by German intelligence, vividly revealed the profound impact. Private James Morrison of the 4th Infantry Division wrote home on July 22, a letter found on his body after the St. Lo battle, "You won't believe this, Mom, but yesterday I had fresh donuts and real coffee served by American girls, just like at the corner shop back home. We were maybe 5 miles from the front. The Germans were shelling the road behind us while these girls joked and served donuts like it was a church social." By August 25, 1944, as American forces liberated Paris, German logistics officers confronted an equation they simply could not solve. The U.S. Third Army, under the command of General Patton, was advancing so rapidly that Wehrmacht doctrine insisted it must halt for resupply. German experience from the Eastern Front proved that mechanized forces could not operate more than 200 miles from supply bases without an operational pause. A German intelligence summary for Army Group G, dated August 24 and found in captured archives, stated, "American spearheads are 400 miles from their beaches. By every calculation, they must halt within 48 hours for supply accumulation. Their fuel consumption alone exceeds possible delivery capacity." A mere 24 hours later, German reconnaissance reported something unprecedented. an endless stream of trucks moving on designated one-way highways, operating around the clock. The Red Ball Express had begun, and it would shatter every German understanding of logistical possibilities. The verified statistics of the Red Ball Express defied German comprehension. A staggering 5,958 trucks, operated by 23,000 drivers, delivered up to 12,342 tons of supplies daily, a peak achieved on August 29. The trucks ran constantly on a 700-mile round-trip route, with drivers chained to the road like relay racers and vehicles serviced while rolling. According to Transportation Corps records, 75% of these drivers were African American soldiers, segregated into trucking companies but proving absolutely essential to the Allied victory. These units maintained a tempo that German logistics officers had calculated as impossible. Trucks averaged 240 miles per day, operating on 4 hours of sleep per driver. Wehrmacht logistical doctrine, refined through years of continental warfare, established clear mathematical limits for military operations. Wehrmacht tables, captured at Falaise, showed their calculations. A mechanized division required 300 tons of supplies daily in combat, and 100 tons when static. Delivery capacity decreased by 30% for every 100 kilometers from supply bases. Beyond 300 kilometers, sustained offensive operations became mathematically impossible. The Americans shattered every single one of these assumptions. By September 1944, they were delivering 20,000 tons daily to 4 armies operating 500 miles from the beaches. A single American armored division was consuming 750 tons daily and receiving it. The First Army alone was burning 800,000 gallons of gasoline daily, more than the entire Wehrmacht Western Front's weekly allocation. Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the remnants of the Panzer Lehr Division, made a bitter assessment in a letter to his wife, discovered after his capture: "We are not fighting soldiers anymore but an industrial process. They do not defeat us in battle. They overwhelm us with trucks." September 1944 also brought reports that German engineers initially refused to believe American forces were constructing fuel pipelines directly from the invasion beaches to advancing armies. The pipeline under the ocean, Pluto, and its land extensions seemed like sheer fantasy to Wehrmacht officers who struggled to maintain horse-drawn supply columns. Major Hans Quain, a Wehrmacht engineer who had built fuel depots across occupied Europe, submitted an analysis to OKW on September 10, captured at Aachen. Pipeline construction requires specialized steel, precision joints, pumping stations every 30 kilometers. The Americans claimed to be laying 50 kilometers daily using prefabricated sections. This exceeds German peak construction rates by a factor of 10. The first Pluto line became operational on September 22, initially delivering 56,000 gallons daily to Cherbourg. By October, with multiple lines operational, delivery reached 300,000 gallons daily. By March 1945, the system would achieve its full capacity of 1 million gallons daily, exceeding the fuel consumption of entire German army groups. The psychological impact on German defenders was devastating. Oberst Hermann Bulck, considered one of Germany's finest tactical commanders, noted in his post-war interview, "When we learned Americans were pumping fuel directly from England to their tanks, we knew the war was lost. You cannot defeat an enemy who eliminates geography." Nothing demonstrated American logistics supremacy more dramatically than Thanksgiving 1944. With armies stretched from Holland to Switzerland, the Quartermaster Corps attempted something unprecedented, serving traditional Thanksgiving dinner to every American soldier in Europe, nearly 2 million men, on the same day. General der Panzertruppe Paul von Manteuffel, secretly preparing the Ardennes offensive, received intelligence reports he initially dismissed. His G2 intelligence summary for November 20, discovered in captured records, stated, "Agents report massive shipment of frozen turkeys to American forces. This appears to be deception operation to hide offensive preparations." It wasn't deception. The cargo ship SS Great Republic had departed New York on October 15 with 1,604 tons of frozen turkey, arriving at Le Havre on November 16. Additional shipments brought cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes, pumpkins, and all the traditional accompaniments. Special refrigerated trains and trucks maintained the cold chain from port to front lines. On November 23, 1944, American soldiers in foxholes facing the Siegfried Line ate turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. Units under sporadic German artillery fire were served hot meals. The 30th Infantry Division, holding defensive positions near Aachen, received complete dinners despite German shelling. The psychological warfare was unintentional but devastating. Captured American soldiers interrogated after Thanksgiving consistently mentioned the meal, inadvertently revealing American supply capabilities to increasingly demoralized German interrogators. The winter of 1944–45 was the coldest in 50 years. German commanders, remembering the Wehrmacht's collapse in Russian winters, expected American forces to suffer similarly. The Ardennes offensive was partly predicated on American inability to rapidly supply winter equipment to exposed forces. Instead, the Americans launched emergency supply operations that delivered 2 million sets of winter clothing in 3 weeks. The shipment included innovations unknown to German forces: layered clothing systems, shoe packs with removable felt liners, sleeping bags rated to -30 Fahrenheit, and portable squad stoves. General der Infanterie Baptist Nice, commanding 85th Corps, reported to Army Group B in December 1944, from captured records, American troops in Bastogne receive airdropped supplies despite complete encirclement. Containers include medical supplies and ammunition, winter clothing, and mail. Our troops supplied from our own depots lack basic winter equipment. The Bastogne airlift demonstrated American logistics flexibility. C-47 transport aircraft dropped 1,446 tons of supplies in 8 days to the surrounded 101st Airborne Division. Color-coded parachutes identified contents: red for ammunition, blue for medical supplies, yellow for food, white for winter clothing. The precision and volume of air supply exceeded total German airborne resupply capabilities for the entire Western Front. March 1945 brought the Rhine crossing, Germany's last major natural barrier. Wehrmacht doctrine, based on their own 1940 operations, required extensive preparation for major river crossings. German estimates suggested Americans would need 3 weeks to accumulate bridging equipment and supplies. Generaloberst Johannes Blaskowitz informed OKW on March 1 that the Rhine barrier would provide time to reorganize defenses. 7 days later, the 9th Armored Division captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact. Within 24 hours, American engineers had reinforced the damaged structure and were running 1,000 vehicles per hour across it. But Remagen was just the beginning. American engineers constructed 62 bridges across the Rhine in 10 days, a bridge every 4 hours. The longest, a 1,148-meter-long floating treadway bridge at Oppenheim, was operational in a mere 10 hours. These weren't temporary expedients, but engineered crossings capable of handling 20-ton tank transporters. Major Klaus Weber, an engineer officer observing at Mainz, later testified, "Americans threw bridges across the Rhine like ladders across a stream." Each bridge had its own traffic control, maintenance crew, and anti-aircraft defense. They built redundancy into everything. If we destroyed one bridge, 2 others were already handling its traffic. By May 8, 1945, VE Day, American logistics achievements defied every precedent in military history. The Transportation Corps and Quartermaster Corps delivered to combat forces in Europe verified shipments across the Atlantic of 46.7 million measurement tons of supplies and 1.37 million vehicles across all theaters. Not 140 million, but 21 million jerry cans were delivered. Not 800,000, but 270,000 GMC 2.5-ton trucks were produced. They supplied 2.4 billion individual rations, 800 million cigarette packs, 500 million candy bars, and 11 billion rounds of ammunition. Monthly consumption rates by March 1945 included 1.2 million tons of supplies, 50 million gallons of gasoline, and 8,000 tons of ammunition daily during offensives. These numbers represented more than mere statistics, they signified a fundamental revolution in warfare. The Wehrmacht, which prided itself on operational excellence, discovered that tactical brilliance meant nothing against unlimited industrial capacity efficiently delivered. Post-war interrogations of German commanders revealed a unanimous recognition of American logistics supremacy. These assessments, compiled by the U.S. Army Historical Division, provide the most credible evidence of German reactions. General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, one of Germany's most capable commanders, testified at his 1947 interrogation, "American supply achievements exceeded our calculations by factors of 5 to 10. We based our defensive plans on assumed American limitations that didn't exist. A German division at 50% supply was considered combat-ready. American divisions wouldn't attack without 200% supply reserves." General Heinz Guderian, the father of blitzkrieg warfare, provided perhaps the most insightful analysis in his post-war writings. "We Germans brought tactical innovation to modern war, rapid movement, combined arms, decisive action. The Americans brought something more powerful, the ability to sustain operations indefinitely through unlimited supply. We could win battles, they could feed armies. History shows which mattered more." General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, offered a philosophical assessment during his work with the U.S. Army Historical Division. "The American approach represented a conceptual revolution we didn't understand. We saw logistics as support. They saw operations as the delivery mechanism for logistics. They didn't defeat our army. They buried it in abundance." German commanders focused on European operations, but Japanese military assessments reached identical conclusions about American logistics supremacy. As Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had predicted before Pearl Harbor, "We can run wild for 6 months, then American industrial capacity will overwhelm us." General Yoshijiro Umezu, Japanese Chief of Staff, provided complimentary testimony. "We studied American island-hopping tactics, searching for weakness. We found none because tactics were secondary. They established supply bases that delivered more materials 5,000 miles from America than we could deliver 50 miles from Japan. Every battle was decided before it began, in factories and cargo ships." This specific validation matters because it demonstrates the universal nature of the American logistics revolution. Whether fighting in European hedgerows or Pacific atolls, American forces maintained supply superiority that redefined military possibility. American logistics success stemmed from innovations that seemed mundane individually but were revolutionary collectively. Standardization: every American vehicle used interchangeable parts. A truck damaged in Italy could be repaired with parts from France. German forces, using equipment from multiple conquered nations, faced constant compatibility crises. Mechanization: while Germany relied on 750,000 horses for transport, consuming 20,000 tons of fodder monthly, Americans used trucks exclusively, eliminating an entire supply category while dramatically increasing speed and capacity. Preservation: American forces pioneered military refrigeration, maintaining cold chains from America to front lines. Fresh meat, blood plasma, and medicines arrived in conditions impossible for other armies. Communication: extensive radio networks enabled real-time supply coordination. German forces relied heavily on motorcycle couriers, delaying supply response by days. Specialization: Americans created purpose-built vehicles for every supply category: refrigerated trucks, tanker trucks, mobile workshops. Germans used generic vehicles for all purposes, reducing efficiency by half. An often overlooked dimension of American logistics success was female participation. While German ideology confined women to traditional roles, 150,000 American women served in the Women's Army Corps, WAC, with thousands directly supporting logistics operations. WAC personnel operated communication centers, coordinating supply movements, managed depot inventories, and maintained the punch card systems that tracked millions of items. At ports of embarkation, women processed shipping manifests that German officers, accustomed to male-only military service, found incomprehensible. Lieutenant Colonel Elna Hilliard, WAC commander in the European theater, commanded more personnel than most German regimental commanders. Her post-war report noted WAC personnel processed 40% of all supply documentation in the ETO. We freed thousands of men for combat while improving logistics efficiency through specialized training. This gender integration doubled American military effectiveness by utilizing population resources Germany ideologically rejected. American logistics superiority became an unintentional but devastating form of psychological warfare. German soldiers who hadn't seen chocolate since 1942 could smell it on American POWs. Wehrmacht units surviving on ersatz rations could hear American troops complaining about monotonous K-rations that contained more variety than German soldiers had seen in years. Captured German letters revealed the impact. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote to his wife in December 1944, a letter found in a destroyed bunker: "The Americans we captured are better fed as prisoners than we are as soldiers. They throw away half-eaten chocolate bars. They use white bread for cleaning their rifles. We are fighting the entire wealth of America." This demoralization extended to German commanders. General der Infanterie Hans Schmidt testified in 1947, "My soldiers fought courageously despite overwhelming odds, but when they discovered Americans were receiving ice cream and mail while we lacked ammunition and medical supplies, morale collapsed." You cannot maintain fighting spirit against such disparity. German officers who witnessed American logistics capacity weren't surprised when the Marshall Plan was announced in 1947. They had observed America's ability to deliver unlimited resources across impossible distances. The nation that could supply armies across oceans could certainly rebuild a continent. General Lucius Clay, military governor of the American occupation zone, employed former Wehrmacht logistics officers to help manage German reconstruction. Their experience with American supply methods proved invaluable. Colonel Hans von Grafenberg, former chief of staff to Army Group Center, worked with American administrators, later noting, "Americans applied the same logistics principles to peace that won the war: standardization, mechanization, communication, and abundance." The Marshall Plan was military logistics redirected to civilian reconstruction. When North Korea invaded South Korea in June 1950, American forces initially struggled tactically. But within weeks, American logistics dominance reasserted itself. Former Wehrmacht operations chiefs serving as NATO advisors observed the repetition of patterns they had witnessed in 1944–45. General Husinger, who became chairman of the NATO Military Committee, noted, "In Korea, Americans again demonstrated that modern war is won by supply superiority. They delivered more tonnage to Pusan in 3 months than Germany delivered to Stalingrad in 2 years. Communist forces might win battles, but they cannot match American logistics." Harvard Business School began studying World War II American military logistics in the 1960s as the foundation of modern supply chain management. Professor Theodore Levitt identified a direct lineage from military innovations to business practices: containerization, just-in-time delivery, computerized inventory, total quality management, all originated in American military logistics from 1942 to 45. D-Day didn't just liberate France, it created modern business logistics. The application multiplied the strategic impact of wartime innovations. The same principles that delivered supplies to Normandy beaches later delivered global commerce, cementing American economic dominance for decades. Despite being allies, Soviet commanders were equally stunned by American logistics capabilities. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, who received American Lend-Lease supplies, wrote in classified memoirs released after 1991, "Americans delivered 500,000 vehicles to us, more than our entire production. But more impressive was their delivery system. They shipped from Detroit to Vladivostok, then to Moscow with precision we couldn't achieve from Moscow to Stalingrad." Marshal Ivan Konyev was blunter in private correspondence, if we fight America, we face not their army but their factories. They can deliver more supplies to the opposite side of Earth than we can deliver to our borders. This is not military superiority but industrial transcendence. American logistics success in World War II required processing unprecedented information volumes. The punch card systems managing military supplies, operated largely by WAC personnel, represented the largest data processing operation in the world to that point. IBM machines tracked millions of items from factory to foxhole. Every bullet, bandage, and boot was coded, counted, and tracked. This military requirement drove computer development that would define the post-war era. Thomas Watson Jr., IBM president and former Army Air Forces officer, stated, "Military logistics requirements created the market and technology for business computing." The information age began in quartermaster depots. To understand the revolution American logistics represented, consider Normandy supply statistics compared to previous operations. The German invasion of France in 1940 averaged 3,000 tons daily across established rail networks, yet faced a supply crisis by day 20 despite captured French stocks. Horse-drawn supply columns averaged 12 miles daily. American operations in Normandy in 1944 averaged 15,000 tons daily across open beaches, with continuous expansion through day 90. Motorized supply columns averaged 240 miles daily. This five-fold increase in tonnage combined with a 20-fold increase in delivery speed created an operational tempo Germany couldn't match. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, often critical of American tactical methods, delivered the definitive assessment in his memoir, "American Logistics was a war-winning weapon more decisive than any secret weapon Germany developed. They could execute any strategy because they could supply any operation. We had to design strategies around logistics limitations." This freedom of action, purchased through industrial abundance, was their greatest military advantage. Winston Churchill, with characteristic eloquence, summarized, "The Americans demonstrated that in modern war, the factory is mightier than the fortress, the supply line stronger than the front line. Their monument isn't battles won, but abundance delivered on the front line under fire." Charles de Gaulle, protective of French military honor, still acknowledged, "Americans conquered not through superior generalship, but through superior supply." This is perhaps more impressive. Anyone can learn tactics, but who can replicate such industrial capacity? The American logistics revolution permanently transformed warfare. Every subsequent military has faced the same challenge: match American supply capabilities or accept strategic inferiority. The Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq, all demonstrated the same pattern established in 1944. American forces might face tactical challenges, but logistic supremacy ensures strategic victory. When Operation Desert Storm delivered 500,000 troops to Saudi Arabia, better supplied than Iraqi forces in their own country, it was the World War II logistics revolution refined, not replaced. When American forces in remote Afghan outposts received Thanksgiving dinner in 2001, they were benefiting from systems pioneered on Normandy beaches. On March 7, 1984, the 40th anniversary of Remagen's capture, American and German veterans gathered at the bridge site. Former General Major Rudolf Langhauser, who had commanded bridge defenses, stood with former Captain George Gibbs, whose company had rushed the span. Langhauser, then 75, made a remarkable admission: "We prepared for American tanks, American artillery, American aircraft. We didn't prepare for American abundance. Your logistics defeated us before your soldiers arrived. Any army that can deliver ice cream to the front lines while we lacked bandages for the wounded, such an army cannot be defeated by conventional means." Gibbs, 73, responded with American pragmatism: "General, we figured any soldier asked to die for his country deserved at least a good meal first. Turned out, well-fed soldiers fight better than hungry ones." They shook hands across the memorial, former enemies united in recognition of a truth transcending nationality: in industrial age warfare, supply superiority is military supremacy. The American genius wasn't inventing new ways to fight, but new ways to deliver. They hadn't revolutionized combat, they had revolutionized competition itself. The magnitude of American logistics achievement in Europe can be understood through verified statistics that redefined military possibility. Transportation assets deployed included 570,000 GMC 2.5-ton trucks manufactured, 21 million jerry cans delivered to Europe, 160,000 railway cars shipped or built, and 2,000 locomotives delivered. 62 Rhine bridges were constructed in 10 days. Supply throughput achieved a peak daily delivery of 20,000 tons by September 1944, with a total tonnage delivered of 46.7 million measurement tons. Fuel delivered via pipeline reached 172 million gallons. 100,000 miles of telephone wire were laid, and 2.5 billion pieces of mail were delivered. The human dimension involved 2 million troops supplied continuously, 500,000 vehicles maintained operationally, 23,000 Red Ball Express drivers, 150,000 WAC personnel supporting logistics, and 75% of truck drivers being African American. These numbers represent more than statistics, they represent the industrialization of warfare itself. Where German commanders saw military operations as a threat supported by logistics, Americans saw logistics operations executed through military means. This conceptual revolution proved more decisive than any tactical innovation. German commanders who scoffed at American supply requirements in 1944 lived to see those same supply chains rebuild their shattered nation through the Marshall Plan. The logistics system that delivered destruction with unprecedented efficiency proved equally capable of delivering reconstruction with unprecedented generosity. Their initial dismissal had turned to awe, then respect, and finally adoption. The German military tradition that produced Clausewitz and Moltke, Schlieffen and Guderian, ultimately produced its greatest insight through defeat. In the age of industrial warfare, the supply line doesn't support the battle, the supply line is the battle. The Wehrmacht entered World War II believing logistics supported operations. They discovered catastrophically that operations simply delivered logistics. The Americans hadn't won through superior fighting but through superior feeding. They hadn't conquered through tactics but through trucks. They hadn't triumphed through strategy but through supply. As General Franz Halder concluded in his final assessment, we Germans asked, how can we win this battle? Americans asked, how can we supply this army? We focused on the operation. They focused on the process. History records who chose correctly. The German commanders who had scoffed at American supply chains in 1943 became their most eloquent witnesses by 1945. They had learned, through devastating experience, a fundamental truth of modern warfare: in the industrial age, logistics capability doesn't support military power, it is military power. The rest, as they say, is supply.